Faculty of Architecture. Thank you so much for giving us the time of your day for this interview. So first thing, could we ask what inspired you to become an architect?
So growing up, what was interesting with my upbringing, of course I've got two other partners, but so my dad was an industrialist, he was an engineer, and he was somebody who was fairly innovative in his own right, because he would actually kind of make machines, right? So he was always tinkering with stuff, making stuff, improvising, very hands-on in the way he used to do things, and I always used to find that fascinating. And so that was the engineering side of it, and my mom growing up was very interested in decor, so we used to always have a nice garden. There were always, inside outside magazines at home with cuttings and so on and so forth. So there was the artistic side when it came to decor and things like that, which my mom was interested in. And I think that both of those kind of had an influence on me. Like I like the idea of making, and I like the sense of aesthetics. My dad had horrible aesthetics. My mom had zero sense of engineering. I was hoping I'd get the best of both and not the worst. So then I thought becoming an architect was probably like a logical way of bringing these two things together. And I was right, it actually is where science and art come together. So that was really the first inspiration. I also happened to, my best friend in school, his dad was an architect. And his was the only home that my parents would let me go to do sleepovers and study. So, and I used to go to his house, and his dad used to always work late night. And it was amazing because it was very old school, so everything was hand drawn. He had a very large drafting table, he had amazing calligraphy, and he used to make these wonderful drawings, with the lamp on the drawing board, and it was a very romantic way of, sitting and drawing late night, making these beautiful drawings, and it looked like a lot of fun. So it was kind of a combination of all of these things, and I was pretty sure by the time I was in high school that I wanted to do architecture. So that's how it started.
So how did you take this initial inspiration and how did it lead to the formation of your own practice?
Well, you have to go through a course first, and while I enrolled myself into college, so interestingly I have two partners. One of them is a classmate of mine from kindergarten. So he's been with me for a very long time, and we met our third partner in college. So he joined college to do architecture. We met him there, and I think we were three of the smartest kids when it came to design in class. We were doing pretty well, all three of us. So obviously I was already friends with one of them, like best friends with one of them, and the other one, it was more about like resonating with each other when it comes to design, so on and so forth. And what happened in the fifth semester is that we got a chance to do an interior. My partners, it's a small project, like 700 square feet. And the three of us collaborated and we designed and got that project executed as a team for the first time. So it was interesting that we could work and we could sort of deliver something, and then with the same ideology, we kind of, when we finished having worked for a couple of years in different offices, came together to start our firm. So that's
Cadence Architects, the word cadence is very intriguing. What's the story behind it?
I wish I could tell you something very smart, but it's a pretty stupid story. So this guy is a classmate from kindergarten. And so I have a bunch of friends from kindergarten. So then when we started, we didn't have a name. So then one evening, I will not mention where, but we were sitting late into the night, and then we were saying, can we come up with a name? One of our other friends, who was like one of the smarter ones in school, who's a software engineer, wanted to sound smart at the table. So he said, why don't you guys name it Cadence? And it sounded great. And then we named it Cadence. He at the time knew that it's a very large IT company. He's a software engineer. He thought we're not going to last long. He wanted to sound cool at the table. So he said Cadence. We named it Cadence. We only realized much later that there's a large company called Cadence. But the first project we did when we started this office got published in Inside Outside, and the name was already out, so then we didn't want to change it. But I think in hindsight, I like the name Cadence because I think it's to do with rhythm and flow, and I think our work has a lot to do with that. So, in a sense, it resonates with that name. We think of rhythm, we think of flow, and we think of composition, just like musical notes. So, I think there is a connection eventually, but it was a happy coincidence.
During education, did you focus more on like design, innovation, or like theory and technical skills? So, what was like your main focus?
So, when I say my education, it's two parts because I did my undergrad here, I did my master's in the US. So, I think an undergrad is more important for you guys, right? So, when I was in undergrad, I think the entire onus was on design, right? So this is early 2000s, right? So internet was just coming in. It was not as omnipresent as it is today. You know, it's part of your life, like social media and all of that. We didn't have any of that. So there was this tremendous hunger to really find out for ourselves as to what is it that we are interested in, what is it that we like, what do we think is good, and what we think is good, is it really good? You know, there were all these questions when it came to design. So what does that mean? So any new building in the city, we would go, we would spend time there, we would ask ourselves, do I like this, do I not like this? We knew pretty much every book in the library, you know. So there was a lot of hunger. I think we were interested in theory, but I don't think in that sense we had the right education for theory. Right? All the theory that mattered happened to us through design because we had great tutors in RV. I went to RV college. Back then we had great practicing architects teaching us, young architects who either went abroad or they were from good schools, like set. And so the theory that we learned pertaining, it was never theory. There was a course in theory, but I don't think that was very relevant. So the theory of design came through design, and the onus was on learning design. The onus was on developing a sensibility, on like figuring out who I am as a designer. So a lot of thinking was primarily focused on that.
So of the many stories that we have heard from other architects, there's one singular lesson from their college life that has inspired them to become, the way they are as an architect. So was there any lesson in your life that inspired you to become like the principal architect of Cadence?
Well, I don't think there was a lesson per se, but I think there was the confidence that we got from doing whatever we did, right? Like I told you in the 5th semester, when we ended up making something that gave us a lot of confidence that we have the ability to make something meaningful. So confidence came from there. Confidence came from the fact that I was an average student in school growing up, right? Like middle school, high school. I was just, I was always doing some stuff on stage, or I was playing sport. I would just get 70, 80% on a very good day, but mostly in my 70s. And then when I got into architecture and suddenly I was doing so well, we were like topping class and we were doing really well. That gave us a lot of confidence. So we were not used to that before that. So I think that gave a lot of confidence. Being recognized by architects who meant something at that time. Architects were teaching us. When they would say that, look, we think you have the ability to do something important and big, that gave us the maximum confidence. And that happened to all three of us at different times. Different teachers, people who mattered in the design industry then would look at our work and say, you've got some stuff in you. That gave us maximum confidence, I think.
So when you start a new project, what's usually the first thing to do?
Now, when we work now. So I think there are two parts to every project, right? There is a client and the client has his requirements. You got to listen very carefully, understand what the client wants, understand what the site needs. There's context, there's there's weather, there's context, there's budget, there's client, his personality, their requirements. There's all of that. That's clearly what you would definitely need to look at. But I think more importantly, there's a personal agenda of what we are interested in, right, as an office. And that's a sensibility we've developed over a period of time, which means that we have a certain attitude towards material, we have a certain attitude towards form, we have a certain attitude towards tectonics, we have a certain attitude towards space, we have a certain attitude towards novelty. This is a personal agenda. We don't necessarily discuss this with the client, right? This is like the subtext to the whole project. So one is the physical attributes of what a site needs, a client, and so on and so forth. You need to take those into account, but we also take into account is what we are interested in doing as a firm, right? And you don't necessarily have that conversation directly with the client. It's very like it goes, it's like subterfuge. You don't let them, kind of not let them know, but you let that dictate and make that solve all things that the client's interested in. So I think that becomes very important as a starting point to see how we can further our interest and agenda while we do what the site needs, the client needs, so on and so forth. So they need to come together. So any successful project is them being happy, but us being happy too for having done what we're interested in doing. Right?
So as you mentioned, you told about the first phase of the designing process. Do you prefer starting off with sketches or starting off digitally or any mode that you prefer? What would you do?
I think it varies from project to project, but I think it's very important to understand that a lot of times the mode from which you start sort of dictates the process also. So there have been times when we've started with a physical model, there have been times when we've started with a digital model, there have been times when we've started with a 2D artwork, there have been times when it's just sketching, there are times when we start with a diagram, where you conceptually kind of reduce all of it to a diagram and see how that can sort of push the project. So it's a combination of various things, but I strongly believe that whatever starting point you take and the medium in which you operate dictates what the project's going to be.
And are there any projects which push you out of your comfort zone?
I mean, every time you get a new type that you've not done, let's say you're an office that's doing a lot of house, and suddenly land up with the hospital project, So every time there is a new type, it always challenges you, because then you have to kind of go back to the basics and really look at what needs to be done and then figure out how to do it. So it happens a lot. So let's say you've never done a restaurant before, right? And then you get this project. There's a lot of learning. How do kitchens work? What is the right size that we do? How do we do lighting for the restaurant? It's very different from how you do it in other spaces, right? So every time there's a change in type or there's a change in scale. Let's say you're used to doing things that are of a certain size and suddenly you end up with this really large project. Happens to you guys, right? When you go from semester to semester, it just starts ballooning up and becomes bigger and bigger. Same challenges, nothing changes.
So how do you come up with a core concept when you start designing something? Is it inspired by the site or by the client?
Yeah, like I said, I sort of answered that question before, wherein the trigger for a project could be from the site, could be from the client, could be from the client's requirement which is unique, could be any of those things, but it could also be something that you are interested in. Let's say I have discovered this new material that I want to use. Let's say I want to use rambler. And in my head I'm thinking, I want to figure out a way to use rambler. I want to explore that material. Let's say I get the right client with the right project for that. Then that becomes the starting point. How am I going to use rammed earth to do everything that a Cadence project does, or that I'm interested in, while it solves all the requirements of what the client has? Or it could be a client who's very quirky. Let's say the client's an artist, and let's say he's interested in, all his artwork is in resin. I'm just saying, right? That's a great starting point because then you can really be opportunistic and push the client to kind of think in a different way. So if he's working with resin, he's going to have a very plastic mindset of how things work. So I want to exploit that, right? So you have to be opportunistic about this. So it could be site, it could be client, it could be your own thing that you're interested in, but there needs to be something. So that how do you come up with a concept is a very difficult one to answer. The point is the project needs a concept that could come from any one of these things. So you got to figure out what that is. Just like when you're in school, right? Like first day, the paper is empty, but you feel it's empty, but it's full of cliches. You try to draw the first line, you're like, oh, I've already done this. This is already there. It's already, you know what I'm trying to say? You got to really figure out where the idea comes from. So it's the same thing, and then we look for opportunities, and then you just build on something. Or sometimes you think you started with something that makes sense, and when it doesn't, you abandon it and you move to something else. Or you start with something but it becomes something else. So you have to be very nimble in the way you operate. So you have to be bullheaded but nimble. So you have to believe in something, but you have to be equally open to discarding something, or modulating it, or changing it, or inverting it, or whatever. How plastic is your mind to do whatever you need to do, and how opportunistic are you to find an opening somewhere to kind of explore. So I think it's about it's very rarely that it's this whole idea of having a concept is not a one moment thing. You know what I'm trying to say? It's not like you had one brainwave and that made the project. It doesn't happen like that. Yes, you kind of hit upon something, but you need to explore it, and then maybe it changes, maybe you're lucky enough for it to go through, or maybe it alters into something. You know what I'm trying to say? It feels like you hit upon this concept, but that doesn't happen. I think it's a longer process of making that reality. And then when you make it reality, it still needs to connect back to your original concept. You know what I'm trying to say? Imagine you start with the most romantic notion of something, and then the life gets sucked out of it and you get something else that has nothing to do with that concept. That's also not good. So if your concept is like this beautiful being, right, in terms of what it is, and your final project is like this reality of nuts and bolts and bereft of anything, then there's no point, right? There has to be some magic in it. So this thing is a long journey. It just doesn't happen at one go. You know what I'm trying to say? So you might think of a concept as a larger idea, but the final detail also needs to feed back to that concept in a nice way. So it's a very, I think it's a more deeper exploration or of an executing an idea, and it's not that instant spark that you think drives the idea. There's a difference.
What is your protocol in managing and resolving the differences between drawings and the actual construction that is going on?
My protocol is to go back crazy on site and say, what is wrong with you guys? Actually according to drawing. And if drawing is wrong, then the protocol is to really go after the architects in office, asking them why they made the wrong. There are only two ways of going about it. But there is no room to, okay, here's the thing. What is the big difference between a sculptor and an architect?
A sculptor can shape it, even if he makes a mistake, he can reshape it.
The sculptor thinks of doing something and does it himself. An architect thinks of doing some things, makes drawings and gets someone else to do it. So your drawing basically is a set of instructions, is an argument, is everything that you want to be on paper. Now you are asking me what happens if somebody doesn't execute that. So that's not allowed. So you don't allow that. You say that bring it down, pull it down, break it, do whatever you have to do, but it has to be according to drawing. So that's the protocol.
I really like the point you made about being bullheaded but nimble, because right now we are also finding it very hard after coming up with something, working on it overnight, that when the teachers give us feedback, we most of the times are not satisfied with it. We want to stick to our concept, but there would be few obvious flaws in it which we have to change. So I really like what you said.
No, so the thing, I'll tell you honestly. Suppose your teacher says something, right? So let's say you've done something and let's say there's a teacher who says, I don't like this. Or let's say there's a teacher who says, I don't like this because it's like this, and if I were you, I would do this. Now, there are two kinds of teachers. The teacher, the more difficult teacher is the one who says, I don't like this and not tells you what to do. Okay, you do have some teachers like that, right? I'm not saying they're wrong, that's the way they operate. I think whether it's situation 1 or 2, in situation 2 where the teacher says, this is not nice because I think you should do this to this, and there's a teacher who says, I just don't like this. I think for both, when the one who says it's this, you should really drop your ego and explore this. Okay? And then really look at how does it matter if this is this or this is this, but be open. Okay? And the teacher who says this is not nice, I don't know what you do, you do this, you do that, you do whatever you want, is also, it's worth exploring. So there's a very fine line about when you need to be stubborn. Okay? So you should always look at your teacher sometimes as your client. Now sometimes beyond the point, I cannot convince a client to do something. You know what I'm trying to say? In this case, your teacher who's your client is a little more informed. He's not as bad as a client who doesn't know anything, right? This person knows something and they are not agreeing with you about something. So you have to believe in what you do, but you have to be equally open to looking in multiple directions or looking at what else you could do to whatever you've done. You should have the ability to do both. I would say your first instinct is to trust your teacher, and the second should be to have that stubbornness. You need both. You just can't be somebody who's just like, oh, you don't like it, fine, I'll do this, no problem. You know, it's not that. I don't know how to say this, but you need to be both. They're contradictory, but you need to be both.
In the same way, are there any guiding principles or core values that Cadence follows to set a different standard?
I don't know about setting a different standard. I think as an office, there are architectural issues, right? For example, there's sustainability, there is space, there is form, there is material, there is detail, there is context. There are all these architectural issues. Different offices are concerned with different kinds of issues, right? So of course, it's not that they're not contextual, but that's not their primary concern. It's not like they're not sustainable, but that's not their primary concern. So there are a few things that we as an office are interested in, right? We're interested in form, we're interested in detail, we're interested in space. We're always interested in the connection between architecture and landscape, right? That edge. That's something that we are preoccupied with in all our projects. We're trying to see how that defines the project. We're interested in the idea of the ground, right? Like how does building sit on the ground? You know, what is the relationship between ground and building, right? So these are concerns that keep coming back in our work, and we kind of do these things. These concerns, we address them differently in different projects. So I would say we look at all of that when we do what we do. And I think somewhere we are still excited about creating experiences that are a little unfamiliar. Right? Something that you're not used to. Like a new experience in space, new experience of form, whether it's visual, whether it's haptic, whatever it is. So I think we like that. That excites us. Like, there's something exciting about listening to a new song, right? You're not listening to it, there's something about it. Because then you're kind of sometimes fighting yourself whether you like it or you don't like it. Some songs are very easy to like, but some are a little different. You know what I'm trying to say? You kind of struggle with it because it challenges what you've liked before. It challenges the way you know things, and then slowly kind of, we like that tension in how somebody kind of feels about the work. It's not very easy that you just say, like everybody says, yeah, right? But it's nice to have that tension where it's kind of questions you. So we are interested in those kind of things.
So while working, do you have any favorite materials that you use in your projects?
I think it changes from time to time. Like the office goes, so when you practice, we are not one of those offices that has used only X. But some are a little different. You know what I'm trying to say? You kind of struggle with it because it challenges what you've liked before. It challenges the way you know things, and then slowly kind of. We like that tension in how somebody kind of feels about the work. It's not very easy that you just say, like everybody says, yeah, right? But it's nice to have that tension where it's kind of questions you. So we are interested in those kind of things.
So while working, do you have any favorite materials that you use in your projects?
I think it changes from time to time. Like the office goes, so when you practice, we are not one of those offices that has used only X number of there are offices that only did brick. The offices that only did like exposed. There are offices that only did colorful paint, whatever it is. It's a phase, it changes. We evolve, we like to adapt, we like to also do many things, try out different things. So there is always a preoccupation with some material or other, but it depends on what stage we are in and when, you know. So I wouldn't say concrete is something that we've always found interesting working with. That has been there for a very long time for us, but it keeps changing in terms of what else we're interested in. For example, now we're really excited about working with, you see that metal there which is not finished, but it's not cotton steel, right? It's not, you know cotton steel? Cotton steel looks like it's rusted steel. So this, but it's still grey, but it has this unfinished quality to it, right? So that's something that, so in our office you can see our columns are unfinished. It's being there is unfinished, you know. So that's something that we like, working with something like that. So at this stage, so it keeps changing.
So some clients come with expectations of Pinterest, like they want it that way. And
Yeah.
like you have a different vision of it, like you might have a different perspective or trying something new with the space. Like how do you convince the client or like usually, like eventually get them into your perspective kind of thing?
It depends what image they get. If it's something that's very close to what we do or we think we can go in that direction, if it's exciting, we don't mind. It's okay. Sometimes a Pinterest image doesn't come from the client, it comes from within the office. Right? We all have it. It could come from inside of me itself. So nothing against a Pinterest image, nothing against a reference. But the question is, what is that reference? Right? So if it's close to some of the things we're interested in, or if it's something that challenges us, we don't mind doing it. Let's say it's not, then a lot of it is educating the client and trying to tell them about who we are. Maybe talk about the image itself, whether that works in our country, whether it's the right thing to do, right? Educate them, counsel them, and also inform them. Maybe what they've got is very good, but we are not the people for it, which is also possible. So you tell them that. So you be honest with it, and then you figure out a way of appropriating it. So open to everything. If it's really what we do, great. If it's challenging, we'll take it up. If it's absolute shit, tell the client in a nice way. Sometimes tell them not in a nice way. But be honest, and it works, doesn't work. So tell them get 5 more images sometimes. They'll get more. So this is also nice. Get me more. Let's see what you get.
What's your perspective on sustainability? Is it aesthetic or responsibility?
See, the sustainability now, there's no choice, right? With the way the world is, climate is, it's a responsibility for everybody. So good design should be sustainable. But sustainability is necessary but not sufficient to make a good project. Do you understand that statement? Sustainability is necessary but not sufficient to make a good project. Just because your project is sustainable doesn't mean it's a good project, right? There are aesthetics is important, space is important, tectonics is important, so many things are important. So I would say nobody has a choice when it comes to sustainability today, because that's the world we are operating in. But a lot of people, in the name of sustainability, are doing a lot of shit, which is not cool. Not cool as in, you don't want to be that. Just because it ticks 20 things doesn't make it a nice project, right? You need to kind of figure out that it's necessary but not sufficient. So yes, is it important? It is important. But it's not the only thing that defines what a good project is. There's a lot more that needs to go into it.
So how do you how do you navigate through the changing expectations of the client?
Change in expectation, like he comes with something, then it becomes something
Yeah,
else.
once it starts and then it changes, he expects something else.
He makes changes, like
Oh, you're talking about, you're basically saying a client says he wants this, you do something, he likes it, but through the project he says, but I saw this, but I want this, I went to this place, I found this new thing, can you put this in here, those kind of things. So I think it's very important to kind of build a relationship with your client where you come across as being very open, like you listen to everything that the client has to say, feels, needs, everything. Be open, but also kind of establish a kind of a power relationship with him, saying that you're going to be the adjudicator of what is good for the project. Okay, which means my client should feel I'm approachable. He should feel whatever I see, whatever I like, whatever I don't like anywhere else, I can go and tell Smaran. But Smaran is the one who's smart enough, intelligent enough to tell me these things work, these things don't. And so what I always tell them as an analogy, it's a bit crude, but to clients I tell them that look, you cannot have a South Indian meal that ends with noodles. Just because you like this, you cannot add this to that, you can't add this to that. So there's a way of how, there has to be a part to whole relationship. So it's important to vet your ideas. Please feel free to come up with that idea, whether that one thing fits with the larger concept that we both agree upon, that we want this this project to be a certain way. I'm open to all ideas that you bring in. We need to see if that idea will make this better or not. So I don't see it as an attempt to change. I see it more as a suggestion from his end. And we have to have that comfort level where I say, let's see if your suggestion works. Please come up with suggestions, no problem. As long as it adds to this project, it's good. But if I feel it doesn't, and it takes away, it confuses it, it kind of, adulterates it, I'm going to be telling you that. I'm going to tell you, I'm not for it, and it's your choice. If we want it, we can think about it, but I'm not for it. So you build that sort of relationship with your client where he understands that you're the final adjudicator. You can tell from one to the other, right? If it is a change that you cannot avoid, let's say somebody wanted a 3-bedroom home because they were convinced that one of their children is not going to come back from abroad, but halfway through the project, let's say that child wants to come back and they want this extra room. You cannot say, but you told me it's only this, I'm not going to do it. No, right? I mean, you need to be open, right? You need to understand that they really need this extra bedroom. You have to figure out as an architect as to how you're going to do it. It might even take away from my project's purity in terms of how I had imagined it, but that's okay. You still need to do it for them. You can't say, I was doing this masterpiece, put 2 kids in one room, I don't care. It's not going to happen. So you got to be fair.
Sir, in which architectural style or design philosophy that you resonate to most, that you actually use in your designs?
See, all the work we're doing is contemporary and modern, right? But we're inspired by all of history, right? So I like what happened in the Gothic period, I like the Baroque, I like what happened in the South Indian temples and everything, like all of it inspires us. What we are doing is modern and contemporary. So it's been modern and contemporary for 40, 50 years ago, right? Modernism came in the 70s. So we're still there, we're doing that. But we're inspired by pretty much everything that good architecture has to offer over the years.
Of all the competitions that you have taken part in, the design competitions, how do you balance the practical feasibility of a design with something that is an entry for a competition?
See, you have to understand a lot of time competitions are done in a constricted amount of time. Okay? Typically speaking, you do the boldest things on a competition. Okay? You kind of, sometimes you're more, I think you're more conservative when you do a real project and you feel more liberated when you're doing a competition. Maybe it's the adrenaline, maybe it's that, and maybe it's this idea of competing and beating others, you want to outdo them. So generally you have that and then you just go all out, because there's also this thing about you might not win it, I just want to have fun with it, right? And then and it's invariably teamwork and everybody's there. So at least for us, all our competition projects have been a lot more risk taking in terms of how we are pushing boundaries, whether that's aesthetics, whether that's politics, in terms of how things work, whatever. I feel that we don't look at, it's not a way of looking at practicality. It's really the idea of trying to see how can you do something that's like amazing. Just like that's the starting point. You're just very aggressive, very ambitious, very free with the way you think, and not very measured, which is what you do in a real project. I think I would look at it like that.
So could you give us an example of such a case?
So I don't know if you've seen the library project of ours, SMBIT. You should see the library project. It's on our website, Instagram.
And that is the result of a competition. And I think it changed the final product to the competition entry changed by only about 10-15%. What we did for the competition by working for 4 days became an eventual building, because we won that competition and it's 1 lakh square feet, so it's this really large building, and then we built it. But I think it's like a very exciting building, it's really like your heart races when you're there and when you look at that building. So I think that's a result of it coming through a competition. So look up that project.
Being part of so many design events and seminars and everything, what are some positive learnings that you have carried into Cadence?
No, I think when you go out and meet people, there's a lot of learning, right? So you understand how people speak, how they carry themselves, what's the work that they do, what else is happening across the country, amongst different countries. And when you meet people, you get, because see, what is your biggest challenge when you finish college? The biggest challenge is how you're going to learn.
Right? Nobody can stop you from not learning and just practicing for another 40 years. It's possible theoretically. What is challenging is how do you continue learning? You don't have, suddenly, let's say you start a practice, who's going to crit what you've done? Who's going to say, this doesn't work, make this better, what happened? No, there's nobody to talk to. It's only you. Right? So you need to start getting better so that you develop the critical ability to critique yourself, to critique what you do, to understand, like, I'll give you a simple example. Let's say you make Maggie. When you eat your Maggie, I can ask you to rate it. And you'll very quickly rate it. Because you eaten Maggie made by so many people. Your mom's Maggie, your friend's Maggie, Maggie in Goa. You know what I'm trying to say? Must have eaten, no? You've eaten Maggie in many places. Have you eaten Maggie at airlines with that? No? It's pretty good. You should try. But I'm just saying, you're able to assess how good your Maggie is based on all the Maggie you've eaten, right? Now let's say the problem happens when you make your first project and you draw it out. Is it easy to just critique it, saying that this is that good? No, right? So when you meet a lot of people, when you kind of understand how all of this is happening, you'll be able to judge yourself, gauge yourself, critique yourself and make yourself better. That's the learning. If I just sit in this office, I go home, I come back to office, I go home, and I'm not open to anything else, where will the learning come from? If you've eaten only your Maggie all your life, how will you know who makes better Maggie? You get my point? That's what happens.
If you were to mentor the architecture students now, how would you advise them to build a mindset and skill?
I think first, I'm telling you guys, first you have to learn how to draw and draw well. every jury or teacher would have said, oh God, shit drawing, you don't know, and you would have and I'm not saying the same thing, but it's really the truth. You come to an office like this, you have to draw. First, develop the skill of drawing. Most important. You can maybe learn design and everything on the go when you work in different offices, but you have to, when you finish 5 years, you should, anything I give you, if I say make a working drawing of this table, when you draw it has to be perfect.
Right? That's step number one. Second, then you have to explore. You should know all the best architecture that's happening around the world, who your favorite architects are, what's the new projects that they're doing. You should be very aware. Be aware of what's happening in the world of architecture, what other students are doing abroad, what is their skill set. Of course, you have to be good in software, you have to be good in physical model making. You have to have a sense of material, like, if you say stone, you should feel stone a certain, you should have an empathy towards materials, towards details. If something needs to, if this edge appears to float, you should feel that, okay, isn't it beautiful that concrete appears to float? You know what I'm trying to say over here? It's a nice thing, no? Concrete is so heavy, but the fact that there is this reveal over here, you can see a shadow there, I think is great, right? And suddenly, if this was acrylic, and if this was floating, I don't think it would mean so much to us. Would it mean so much to us? So concrete makes us feel a certain way, right? There's that heaviness to it. And the moment I say acrylic, there's a lightness to it. And the moment I say pink acrylic, there's a fun element to it, right? So I'm saying we have to develop empathy towards all of these things. You should feel, you should be very emotional about materials, about joinery, about junctions, about form, shape, space. You should have that empathy with things. You should feel for things deeply. You need to start building that. And if you start doing that, then you can do things that are sensitive as you go along. So I feel that's very important. And not just be like, dude, it's like the same thing, man. Doesn't matter. You should be like that, right? Like there's that, like in the sense sometimes there's this numbness to everything, right? Like nothing excites you, nothing's good enough, nothing's cool enough. But I'm saying we need to find that, we need to be excited about all the small things. We need to kind of have an attachment towards this sort of material world in a very different way, because we deal with all of these things, right? So it's so important to do that. So there's the physical and the metaphysical, right? There are things that are tangible and there are things that are intangible. Space is intangible, but you need to start feeling for it. I mean every word I said. Yeah, and it's important, for you guys, So I cannot tell you how important. If you're really serious about practicing architecture, right? So if you really want to be a good architect, you have to focus on all of these things that I said. It's really the truth. There's no other way of doing it. So you have to draw really well and you have to feel for things. Okay?
So once again, thank you so much for sharing your new experiences.
That's it.
Yes.